In a moment that shook the global establishment, Kenya just did the unthinkable. In the footsteps of Burkina Faso and its revolutionary leader, Kenya's former prime minister, has now taken a bold stand. A fiery rejection of the Western democracy model that's long dominated African politics. This is not just a political move. This is the beginning of a pan-African awakening. What does this mean for Africa and the world? In a shocking political statement, Kenya's former prime minister, Raila Odinga, took to the podium. Cameras rolled, the world watched, and what he said sent ripples through the international order. Western democracy has failed Africa. We must build our own model, our own truth. The hall went silent. But in African homes from Nairobi to Ouagadougou, millions nodded in agreement. For decades, elections were held, but nothing changed. For decades, aid was sent, but poverty remained. Now, Kenya is openly questioning the democratic template handed to Africa post-independence, and the country is exploring what a people-first system might look like, one rooted in community, cultural identity, and economic justice. This is more than a policy shift. It's a philosophical rebellion. In the streets of Nairobi and Kisumu, cheers erupted. Just like in Burkina Faso, the people danced, sang, and rallied around their nation's flag. Not because they supported a party, but because for once, their country was standing tall. Citizens are calling for deeper reforms, local agriculture, technological innovation, a stronger African Union, and less dependence on foreign loans. This moment feels different. Not just symbolic, but seismic. A movement is forming, where Africa no longer plays the victim, but the visionary, with nations stepping away from old frameworks and toward self-determined governance. Could we be witnessing the birth of the United States of Africa? Already, whispers of economic blocs, shared military defense, and unified currencies are gaining traction. What once sounded like a dream is now beginning to take form. Because Africa is no longer waiting for permission. It is rising.
Democracy itself, as we have known it for several centuries, is being rejected in even its cradle of Europe and North America. In Africa, the political democracy is an import from the West. Regimes are clawing back hard-won gains. In this charged atmosphere, the youth bulge threatens to overrun governments. The question we are forced to grapple with is, can Africa defy these cross currents and cultivate its own resilient democratic project, one that is universal but uniquely African? That's the question that we want to answer. The question of how to develop socioeconomic and governance systems that ensure African shapes her destiny independently and benefits from her rich and ancient heritages has been with us throughout the many struggles the continent has been through. The founders of the continent grappled with it. The many regimes and movements the continent has been blessed or cursed with struggled with it. Chinua Achebe, the great son of this land and of the African continent, told us, and I quote, "Democracy is not something you put away for 10 years, and then in the 11th year you wake up and start practicing it again," unquote. It's an exercise in perpetuity. Democracy and its place in Africa's development is set to gain even more significance as transactional and inward-looking regimes emerge and directly ask to access Africa's natural wealth in return for security and other forms of support. We have seen an increasing appetite by countries outside Africa for the continent's natural resources, including gold, oil, iron ore, copper ore, bauxite, manganese, and rare earth minerals. In fact, recently, there was a conference in London between the United States and China discussing the prices of rare minerals. The rare minerals are only here on the African continent. No African was represented there. Some African Some countries have recently signed mineral extraction deals in return for security support. Louis Marge, the Central African Director of Human Rights Watch, has called it a mineral deal first, an opportunity for peace second. And it's a shame that you can see ministers of Africa, foreign ministers, going to Washington to sign a peace deal and not in Addis Ababa. It shows how much the world has deviated from the international system that was envisaged by President Woodrow and Harry Truman as the concept of democracy was taking root around the world. On April 2nd, 1917, President Woodrow Wilson went before a joint session of the Congress to seek a declaration of war against Germany and spoke the following words, I quote, "The world must be made the foundations of political liberty. You have no selfish ends to serve. We desire no conquest, no domination. We seek no indemnities for ourselves, no material compensation for the sacrifices we shall freely make. We are but one of the champions of the rights of mankind," unquote. The shift has consequences for the practice of the democracy and governance in Africa. Many believe that imagined inward-looking, transactional brands of politics in the West may very well spread to other parts of the world. Populists are approaching power in several European countries. Very many right-wing parties are gaining support in Europe. They may just seize power and implement their isolationist, transactional imaginations of the world. These shifts come at a time a majority of Africans express support for democracy, but feel that democracy has failed to deliver socio-economic liberation of the continent. It also comes at a time of renewed feeling by Africans that the continent needs to liberate itself completely from former colonizers and chart a distinctly African path to our development. We have seen some of our citizens, especially the youth, celebrate new military rulers who have taken militant postures against former colonial powers and other external powers. We must always remember that Africa is growing increasingly young and digital. About 70% of Africa's population is younger than 35. This generation's greatest demand on their governments is better lives and opportunities than that of their parents. There are those who think that each nation must decide for itself how it will face the emerging global scenarios and their consequences. I belong to those who think that the moment of our founding fathers feared has arrived, and that this is the time the continent must act in unison. We either hang together or each one of us will be hanged separately. Nkrumah said, Africa Union government now. And the other doubting Thomas said, no, the unity must come gradually. Let us start first with building blocks of regional unions, and then eventually we'll come to the continental union government. It's now over 60 years since that time. That union government has not come. This has to be the moment Julius Nyerere had in mind when he said, and I quote, "Unity will not make us rich, but it can make it difficult for Africa and the African people to be disregarded and humiliated. My generation led Africa to political freedom. The current generation of leaders and peoples of Africa must pick up the flickering torch of African freedom, refuel it with their enthusiasm and determination, and carry it forward," unquote. Africa cannot just sit back and watch the changing world with fear and trepidation. Instead, we must set in motion the process of a real transformation of our structures and institutions. We have to strengthen democracy. Our people demand it. They must find ways to make democracy work in unison with tested traditional systems of governance and conflict prevention and resolution. The panel of wise and the panel of eminent African personalities needs to be mainstreamed and strengthened. These two bodies can prove that Africa can still resolve her problems by using the age-old systems of elders and wise men and women. Our continent's Peace and Security Council should be our first port of call when conflicts arise. It should not play second fiddle to other initiatives to bring peace and stability to the continent. I have acted in my other previous incarnation as the African Union's high representative on infrastructure development. And we had grand ideas. Actually, AU has got a very positive program for the continent, but most of it is not ever implemented. We have got African Free Trade Organization, which was meant to fast-track African trade, inter-African trade. Inter-African trade stands today at only 15%. Africa trades less with itself, but more with the external world. Inter-European trade is 70%. Inter-Asian trade is 50%. Even intra-South American trade is at 30%. Us is just 15%. In other words, we seek more markets outside than in the continent. Yet we have got a big potential within the continent of Africa itself. What are the factors that make it difficult for Africans to trade? One is lack of infrastructure. Secondly, are non-tariff barriers imposed by other African countries against each other. This is a big issue here. We have big programs, inter-African highways, Cape to Cairo, Tunis to the Cape, Dakar, Jamena, Khartoum to Djibouti, Dakar to Lagos, Lagos to Mombasa. Then you have inter-African high-speed railway network. Lagos through Cotonou, Lomé, Accra, Abidjan, Freetown, and go all the way to Conakry, to Nouakchott, to Rabat, up to Cairo. Then you've got one running down from Beira to Always in Mozambique to Always Bay in Namibia. Then you've got the Lapset, the Lamu Port, South Sudan, that comes all the way to Bangui in Central African Republic and Kribi in the Cameroonian port of Kribi, creating a land bridge that connects the Atlantic Ocean and the Indian Ocean and opens up the landlocked countries within the interior of Africa. All those are there. Then you've got energy, which is a major issue. The Grand Inga Dam that can actually help to power most of Africa, connecting it through the Southern Africa Power Pool, East African Power Pool, the Central, the West African Power Pool, and help to bring the cost of energy down. Energy is so important for development of the continent. You find that the cost of energy is too high in many African countries. If you go, for example, to the Gambia, the cost is 38 US cents per unit. You cannot do any kind of serious business with that. When in other countries, it is 2 cents up to 4 cents per unit. So you need to find a way of bringing clean, cheap energy across the continent. That's one of the things that we're talking about. Then we are talking about the issue of open skies in the continent. Open skies is what you call a low-hanging fruit. Open up the skies for the